Hey everybody, this is Kevin from Fort Orange Woodworking, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make a very versatile and user-friendly crosscut sled for your table saw. Now, I've said in other videos in the past that given the choice between the table saw and the miter saw, if I could only have one, it's going to be the table saw, because with a good crosscut sled, the table saw becomes a much more versatile tool. You can do crosscuts, rip cuts, you can do your fine cuts, and you can do it with a lot of precision without risk of your fingers and safety. So, to get started, I want to show you my original crosscut sled. It has served me fairly well, but as you can see, it's made out of some pretty flimsy material here. I've got an old broken 4-foot level that I was using as my known straight. I got some OSB board and a leftover 2x4. Now, this has served me pretty well, but there's a slight bow now in the OSB, and I'm just not happy with that. I don't like the performance that it's giving me. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace this old beast. For my new crosscut sled, I'm gonna be using some regular old 3/4 inch melamine whiteboard, which I got from the cull pile of my local Home Depot store. If you don't know what the cull pile is, that is a section in the back, usually a cart or a table, where they keep severely discounted items there, up to 70% off usually. They spray them with a purple mark so that they know that it's a discount item. And they do that because it's usually slightly damaged. So for this piece of melamine, for example, on the discarded corner that I already cut off, the longer piece, it had a broken corner. And that was it, just one broken corner. Took about 2 or 3 inches off of my whole 8-foot board, and I'm gonna use that for a number of projects, not just this, but I had this project specifically in mind for that piece of melamine because it's just perfect. It's nice and flat, it's a known straight, and it's gonna serve very well for a crosscut sled. The other item that I need for this is rails. So that's going to be the board. The other item is going to be the rails. Now, I could use melamine for this as well, so it would slide nice and easy in the grooves. However, I definitely am going to have to rip that melamine to the level that I need for my grooves of my table saw, and melamine can get pretty messy. So I am going with some northeastern maple, which I will cut to size for this. And I'm choosing maple because it's a hardwood, it's dense, and it's gonna slide nice and smooth in those grooves. And honestly, because I have extra. So let's go ahead and get started on making this crosscut sled for your table saw. All right, so step one, the first thing I need to do is get my rails set. And I need a couple of measurements. I need the entire length of the table saw. However, my rails don't have to be the exact length of my table saw because it is going to slide back and forth, but you don't want them too short because you don't want them to get off the track as you're pushing longer material, well, wider material through that crosscut sled. So something around this length right here is what I'm going to use. I do like them to protrude just a little bit beyond the front edge of my saw. And these are going to be, somewhere around 20 inches for my saw. Now, these will slide back and forth, and 20 inches will give me right to there, and that should be plenty. If I went too short, this end would hang off the table and tip, and we don't want that. So this is a good enough length for my table saw. You can go right to the edge if you want to. So these are good at the length they're at right now. I also need to know the width of my grooves, and I can get that by measuring a number of different ways. I can use my tape, and this is exactly 3/4 wide. I could use a ruler, or for my imperial friends out, or excuse me, for my metric friends out there, I could use my digital calipers, which would give me my width in millimeters nice and exact. So this is 3/4 wide. The other measurement I need is the depth, because I need my rails to protrude just above the height of this. If they were too low, the rails would sit in there and they would be kind of just free sliding. They wouldn't be sliding on the bottom, and it wouldn't give you as much control, and you'd run the risk of it jumping out. So you don't want it too shallow, but you want it just protruding a smidge over, I mean, maybe 2 sheets of paper over this height. So here's my, I could try to stick a ruler down there and compensate for the gap in between 0 and the ruler, or I can go exact, and I'll just take my piece of wood here, hold it nice and level, take my pencil, and I'll just mark it. So anything below that is going to be the depth for my rails. Now, here's the next reason why we need to make sure that these rails sit slightly above your workspace. The next step is I'm going to drop my surface, my melamine surface, on top of these rails, and they're going to be glued. So I'm going to glue both ends, both rails, to the melamine board so that it's a temporary stick so that I can screw it in permanently once the glue is dried. Now, you don't want the glue touching your table because it can ruin your finish. One precaution that we can take here is to put some tape down just in case there's any glue spillover. So I'm going to put some tape down here. And that will protect my table saw during the glue up process. All right, so I've got my rails laid down and I've got my melamine on top. For the width of my crosscut sled, I chose to go to the length, to the edge of my table saw, just so that there's no cut off here with wood hanging off. This way it's fully supported all the way to the edge of my table saw. And to the right, I went exactly 12 inches over. So just for a nice even number, if I ever need a 12-inch cut exactly, I'll know that I can go to the edge of my board and it will line up exactly with my table saw at 12 inches. I chose those dimensions. You can choose whatever you want. You can have it go longer this way, you can have it go longer this way, whatever you want. I also am restricted to this 15 3/4 inch depth because that's the size of my melamine. I wanted something nice and wide for wider pieces, and 15.5 inches is good enough. Again, I could go as far back as I wanted to. If I really wanted to, I could just do a glue up of another piece of melamine and make sure that those are level, put longer rails on it. Then I could have a really big crosscut sled. But for me, this is going to be perfectly sufficient. Let's go ahead and glue this up. While you're waiting for the glue to dry, you can go ahead and cut the dimensions for your front and back pieces. They should be exactly as long as your surface board. In my case, it's 33 1/4 inches. But however tall they are is going to be up to you. You don't want it to be too tall because then it's going to become structurally unstable and you might run the risk of it snapping off while you use it. So I find that somewhere between 3 and 4 inches is perfectly sufficient for the height of your boards. Okay, so I'm going to cut another piece of melamine that is 33 1/4 inches, which is the length of my crosscut sled. And because this is almost 16 inches wide, I will get almost 4 inches out of these sections. I'll have 4 sections here, 2 for my front, doubled up, 2 for my back, doubled up. Each one will be just under 4 inches, somewhere around 3 3/4. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so our glue up is done. Our rails are temporarily on there. And now we just got to put a couple screws in here to make sure these don't go anywhere permanently. Also off to the side here, like I mentioned in the previous section, I've cut these rails and I will show you how these are going to become the front and the back. So let's get our holes in here, get our pilot guide going, and our number 6 1-inch screws so that we don't poke through our surface. Next, we're going to install our front and back supports, and you will see that I have a slight height difference in these, and the reason why I did that is because I want one of these to go right down to the rails, and then the shorter one will butt up right against it, and I compensated for the 3/4 inch thickness of the platform surface, and I'm hoping what that's going to do is give it a nice bit of structural integrity. It'll be a little bit solid around the back gripping, and it'll be a little more solid front to back gripping, and then downward on the platform itself. I'm going to go ahead and glue this up and let it rest. Once we've got our clamps off, the next step is going to be to put our cut through the center of this. So we're going to raise the blade, and we're going to go about 3/4. So it's just peeking over 3/4. Now we've got our cut line, and we are pretty much done. Functionally, this thing is pretty much done right now, except I am going to do a couple of more add-ons for it because this is not my first crosscut sled, and I want to make some improvements. I want to make it better than the last one. So, two things that I'm doing is, number one, I got some scrap wood here, just some 3/4 pine that I had left over, and I'm going to attach this to the top of my melamine for a couple reasons. Number one, I want to give it some more structural integrity along the top, and also I wanted a piece of hardwood to have to use attachments. So what I mean is I'm going to put these on here on the top, give it that structural integrity, and give some screws something to bite into, because I want to put a couple handles on here to keep my thumbs away from the back of the fence. So if I have handles, I know that they're always up top and I can push nice and steady without running the risk of getting my thumbs caught in there, because it's happened to some people. The second thing I'm going to do is, I noticed that my fence here was a little out of square. When I glued these up, they must have pulled to the back, and they pulled towards the back that way. And I don't want that, because it's going to give it a little bit of wobbliness when I go to cut a piece, because there'll be a slight gap there. So to fix that, I'm going to take these little runners here, cut from the same scrap, and I'm going to put these in on the ends and make sure that those come in nice and tight on the ends. That way, I'll know that it's square because I cut this to the bottom length exactly. The other thing that this is going to do is it will prevent me from putting in a piece of material that's too tall. If I put in a piece of material that's too tall, you have to raise the blade, and the blade will actually go up, up, up. And once it gets beyond, this halfway point, you really start to lose the structural integrity of this thing, like I talked about earlier. You don't want this thing snapping in half, because then it's obviously of no use to you. So this will help keep some of that structural integrity by telling me not to put in any piece that doesn't fit underneath it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And there you have it, one complete crosscut sled. This is a pretty significant upgrade from my previous version, and I am really happy that I took the time to do this. The handles, I think, are going to be a big upgrade for safety purposes, keeping my hands out of the way of the blade as it approaches the back. There's other things that you could do with this crosscut sled, like put T-tracks in it so you can put clamps in there to hold things. But overall, this is a functional piece and I am really happy with it. I hope you enjoyed the video, everybody. Feel free to leave me a comment and please remember to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I will see you next time in the shop. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.